thank you. Okay, here we go. For over a generation, more than 1/5 of U.S. women have had their babies by cesarean surgery. With such a high rate of surgical birth, the question of how to give birth after a previous cesarean comes up for tens of thousands of women every year. If you're one of them, you have probably already noticed that there is a lot of confusing, even contradictory information circulating about vaginal birth after cesarean. The medical evidence about Vbac is actually clearer than some recent medical and media interpretations of it would suggest. Cesarean surgery is just as risky as other major abdominal surgery for the mother, a considerably higher risk for her than vaginal birth. With repeat cesarean, she has 3 times the chance of dying and roughly 5 to 10 times the risk of suffering complications such as infection, dangerous blood loss, bless you, transfusion, bless you, bless you, complications from anesthesia, injuries to the bladder, intestines, or urethra, which is where you pee out of, will be popping in and out, but I was a C-section baby. This is so interesting to me. Oh, thank you so much, Lana. Future bowel obstructions, hysterectomy, ectopic pregnancies, infertility, and dangerous placental complications. The more cesareans a woman has, the more the risk to her increase. Most of the above complications involve weeks of recovery, inconvenience, emotional trauma, and expense at the least. According to Ms. Wagner, a neonatologist, that's a hard word to say, and perinatal scientist who worked for WHO for 15 years. If women lose the option of Vbac, we can expect there be at least 12 maternal deaths every year in the United States because of unnecessary cesarean section, not to mention thousands of cases of injury and illnesses. Excuse me. What? Here. Do you want to help us? Here. Sorry, he's hungry. There you go. Vbac, on the other hand, is safe when other risk factors such as cytotec or other prostaglandin inductions aren't added. The risk of uterine rupture in a woman with a previous transverse lower uterine incision, the safest location on the uterus for incision, has always been and remains about 0.5%. Changes in Vbac policy. For most of the 20th century, North American doctors automatically scheduled repeat cesareans for those women who had previous cesareans because they feared that the scar on the woman's uterus might rupture during labor. European physicians have, for the most part, long understood that Vbacs are safe for most women. Many U.S. doctors assumed that these women had their first cesarean because some physical defect, which was likely to still exist in a subsequent pregnancy. Neither of these assumptions turn out to be true. In the 1970s, during the peak years of the North American home birth movement, another campaign quickly took hold of the nation. While most women who had previous cesareans still followed their doctor's advice about having a repeat cesarean. A few skeptics and assertive women argued with their doctors and won their cooperation to try for vaginal birth. When they succeeded in giving birth vaginally, they wrote books and started organizations that challenged OB's long-held assumptions about Vbac, uterine rupture, and women's capabilities. In the early 1980s, one of the books, Nancy Weiner, Cohen's Silent Knife, was covered on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, which dubbed it the Bible of Cesarean prevention. When many other women followed this lead, and a handful of doctors became hardworking advocates of Vbac. North American statistics on Vbac began to appear for the first time. The results were encouraging and reassuring. When women who tried Vbac were compared with those who had repeat cesareans, researchers consistently found that Vbac trials were safer for mothers with transverse lower uterine incisions and as safe for babies as repeat cesareans. Nearly 80% of women who tried Vbac were able to give birth vaginally. That's a really high percentage. By 1988, when the U.S. national cesarean rate reached 25%, the American College of OBs and Gynecologists, ACOG, added its voice to the chorus calling for women's rights to choose vaginal birth choose vaginal birth in most pregnancies following cesarean section. The rate of Vbac increased significantly between 1970, when only 2% of U.S. women tried Vbac, and in 1996, when 28% of Vbac rate has dropped a lot for a reason that I explained below. By 1995, the cesarean rate had dropped about 21%, largely because of the increasing number of Vbacs. Here you go, Bubba Butt. ACOG has published bulletins on Vbac since the late 1980s. In 1995, ACOG's Vbac bulletin recommended limiting repeat cesarean births to those that were medically necessary. OBs should counsel the encouraging women who try to give birth vaginally. It said as this would lead to shorter hospital stays, fewer transfusions, fewer postpartum fevers, and a savings of more than $4,000 per birth. Cause something that I learned is sorry. Never mind. OBs should counsel and encourage women to try to give birth vaginally. It said, as this would lead to shorter hospital stays, fewer transfusions, fewer postpartum fees, and a savings of more than $4. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Oh my gosh. I hope my video is like lagging, but I'm safe as. Midwives and home births are actually way cheaper than hospitals. So I thought it would be more expensive and like more out of pocket and like my insurance covered. I was really worried, but actually homes are way more inexpensive. One of the midwives I was looking at that does home births, she caps out at $4,000. So no matter what you get or whatever, or how the birth goes or anything, and she does a sliding scale. So if you make so much, it'll be $2,000. If you make $30,000 a year, and then if you make like 60, it'll be $3,500, and then but it caps at $4,000. I don't know. I thought that's really cool because I just thought that a hospital birth would be less expensive than a home birth. But anyways, Not only would this course of action be for women, said ACOG, it would not cause any greater risk for their babies. ACOG also recommended that women with 2 or more previous cesareans with no contraindications who want Vbac should not be discouraged from trying for a vaginal birth. That women with large babies should not be automatically exempted from trying a Vbac, and that Vbacs should not be limited to the largest hospitals. All of the above recommendations were supported by published events cited in the references to the bulletin. Despite the 1995 ACOG recommendations in the evidence supporting them, some physicians continued to prefer the convenience of scheduled cesarean sections and the lowered medico-legal risk they face in maintaining the status quo. A sampling of OB's responses to the question, should we rethink the criteria for Vbac, published in a widely read magazine for OBs, included the following. Medico-legal risks equals multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Only one lawsuit ruins your life and your family's future. Notice that the focus on this doctor's concern is not the woman having the baby, but his family and his own welfare. I am so sorry if my video is lagging. The risks to mother and newborns with Vbac are far greater than has been reported. Cesarean sections by competent OB surgeons is just another way to deliver babies. I have directly observed bad cases involving uterine bladder ruptures, especially when epidurals and uterotonics, oxytocin and prostaglandins are used. It is primarily CS for cesarean section, not Vbac, that puts at risk. Why is primary cesareans done more between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m.? This response from an OB who obviously thinks too many cesareans are performed points to the convenience factor. As far back as 1985, in New England, the New England Journal of Medicine published an opinion piece written by 2 young OBs proposing that all women should give birth by cesarean. Oh my gosh. Since there was and still is no evidence to support this preposterous and outrageous proposal, doctors, based on their admittedly very crude hypothetical estimation and a tortuous line of reasoning. One of the most noteworthy passages was the colossal "what if." We probably would never vary our procedures, section every woman, if the costs of saving a baby's life were the loss of a mother's. But what if it were a question of 2 babies saved per lost mother, or 5, or 10, or, as our circulations roughly suggest, as many as 36 to 360? If it seems that these good doctors might have been pulling numbers out of a hat, much as a magician pulls out a rabbit that's close, according to O.B. Bruce Flamm, who has written extensively about Vbac for 2 decades, he and several colleagues were at first convinced that the NEJM article was a satire. A satire? Unfortunately, it wasn't. In the summer of 2000, one of 2 authors of the article resurfaced with the idea that women should choose cesareans for the good of their babies, this time aiming her message at childbearing women who read all of the possible choices, Self magazine. In 1998, ACOG abruptly reversed its 1995 position in encouraging Vbac by issuing a new, quite different bulletin on the subject. Still another version of this document was published in 1999. The newest ACOG bulletin withdraws the organization's 95 recommendation that repeat cesarean births should not be done routinely, but rather for specific indication, strongly recommendations that a physician capable of performing emergency cesarean be immediately available when women are laboring for a VBAC. The same guidelines specify that anesthesia and staff for emergency cesarean be available in all hospitals where women are allowed to have VBAC. Comparatively, few U.S. hospitals are able to offer round-the-clock emergency services to the degree stated in these documents, so increasing numbers of pregnant women who wish to have a VBAC are reporting that their caregivers have been scheduling them for repeat cesareans since the publication of the 1998 and 1999 ACOG bulletins. Hold on, I think my son locked himself in a room. 1 second. Okay. Alright, guys. Okay. Sadly, the newest ACOG recommendations effectively close the door to VBAC to most women. For them, it might as well be 1970 when few U.S. physicians conceded that women facing repeat cesareans ought to have a choice in the matter. At least one California hospital requires women to sign an informed consent form before they can have a vaginal birth. Some doctors think that requiring such consent forms will lead more women to choose cesareans, since the dreaded phrase uterine rupture won't appear in the consent form for surgery. And the unpleasant fact of increased maternal death, injury, and illness can be glossed over by an accomplished wordsmith. Instead of interrupting the latest medical studies for what they actually reveal, ACOG has made VBAC the scapegoat for the reported increase in uterine ruptures. Blaming VBAC keeps ACOG from admitting that the evidence shows that the real cause of the rise in ruptures is almost certainly the aggressive labor induction policies that have doubled the induction rate in only a decade, not the still comparatively low VBAC rate. Meanwhile, we in the United States are entering into a new area of forced repeat cesareans for women. So, we will next read media-driven OB policy, and then VBAC at the farm midwifery center, and maximizing your chance to have VBAC. So thank you guys so much for listening today. I hope you guys have a good day, and let me know if you guys have any questions.